I've got to tell you something. I know the absolute best tool to use to get your pheasants, and it's none of these, it's this. You can't beat a good dog to get your pheasants. But before the dog can catch them, you've got to use the right shot shell to bring them to ground. And that's what we're going to cover on this episode of Ron Spomer Outdoors. I'm just back from pheasant hunting again in South Dakota and had a wonderful adventure as usual and found lots of birds. I've got to tell you, pheasant hunting in South Dakota is the finest upland game hunting experience in the world if you like pheasants. There are better grouse and quail and things than other places, but boy, you just can't beat South Dakota. And I am here to provide you with some basic information about how to enjoy and make happen a South Dakota hunt, and especially which shotguns and shot shells to use to be effective. Before we get too deep into this, again, I want to thank all of you for watching, subscribing to our channel, and of course, our patrons on Patreon. And if you would like to see more in-depth videos on hunting and shooting and guns and ballistics and all those wonderful details that we can't show on these public forums, go to ronspomeroutdoorstv.com. And that's all right there. Now, if you're going to go to South Dakota to pheasant hunt, you need to know what you're doing to have a great time. You do not have to go necessarily to a preserve or an outfitted hunt. But I'll tell you what, for a first timer, you might want to try that because they know their stuff and they can get you into birds. But it's entirely possible to hunt on public ground that's wide open, free hunting, buy your license, and you're ready to go. And the Fish and Game has all the information you need on where to find these places, and there's quite a few. Thousands and literally thousands of acres in hundreds and hundreds of different locations that you can hunt for free. Takes a lot of legwork, and you have to understand pheasants and how to outsmart them, and it sure helps to have a great dog, but it can be done. But one of the problems you face is your ammunition. Now let's talk shotguns first, and then we'll get into the problems with the type of ammunition that you get to use. Obviously with shotguns, you've got all the usual gauges, 410, 28, 20, 16, 12 gauge, 10 gauge. I don't recommend a 10 gauge and I don't recommend a 410, but by golly, I have had great success with a little 28 gauge and of course the 20 gauge. I think that's kind of optimum, but a lot of folks still like the old 16 gauge. That's kind of making a bit of a comeback. It's sort of in between the 20 and the 12. But the 12 is by and large the winner. You can't beat it. It's big and you can get it in such a variety of loads that it's going to do the job for you. But don't assume like some folks do that you have to have a 12 gauge, especially a 12 gauge 3-inch shell with 4-shot to kill a pheasant. It gets a little bit overdone. Now pheasants are incredibly hardy and tough birds, and it does take several pellets on that bird to bring him down. They're a lot tougher than most other upland game birds. But you don't have to throw 2 ounces of shot at them. You don't even have to throw 1.5 ounces at them. In my little 28 gauge, I'm shooting 7/8 of an ounce of shot, and I'm smacking pheasants out to, this might sound kind of crazy, but I've measured it 40 yards. Pretty consistently at 30 yards, but every now and then I'll take a long one at 40 yards and smack them dead with a 28 gauge and 7.5 shot. How does that happen? Well, it all has to do with patterning. What the idea with a shotgun is you don't hit them harder with a bigger bullet like you do with rifles. You just have to put a certain number of pellets on the bird. And if your shotgun, with whatever shell you're shooting, will put its pellets evenly distributed, and you put the center of that circular pattern on the bird, you're going to get him, whether it's a 28, 20, 16, 12, doesn't matter. It's not the total volume of pellets in the shell. It's the pattern that your gun throws with those pellets. And you're going to get a little more yardage as you go up in the scale because there's simply more pellets in there. And if the gun and the barrel and the choke are all balanced to the shell and it patterns nicely without a clump of pellets here and a gap right there and another clump here or something, you should do okay. So you'll go 5 yards farther probably with the 20 gauge, another 5 yards farther with the 16, another 5 yards farther with the 12 gauge, and maybe another 5 yards farther with a bigger load of 12 gauge, like a 3-inch 12 gauge. But essentially what I have discovered, and I've been doing this for over 50 years, guys. The shotgun that fits you and delivers a good pattern is all you need. Don't worry about having to get a Super Magnum 12 gauge. And in pellet size, 6-shot works beautifully early in the season, especially. Later in the season with longer shots, you may want to go to a 5 or a 4. That's a bigger pellet. Therefore, it's heavier. Therefore, it will retain more energy downrange and hit harder when it gets to the pheasant. So you might want to consider that. But boy, early in the season and even in the late season under the right conditions, I will use 6s and even 7.5 shot. And the reason is late in the season, I often get closer flushes than I do early, because the birds are concentrated in some pretty heavy cover and they don't want to leave because there's not much out there but empty fields and snow. So you often have to about step on those birds, and then you're ending up getting shots at sight of 20, 25 yards. And that's where my 20 and 28 gauges are really doing well. But you will learn that as you progress as a pheasant hunter, so don't worry too much about it. Any of these shotgun gauges will work for you, and you can buy lighter loads if it kicks too much for you, even in the 12 gauge. You can get some 1-ounce loads in a 12 gauge at the same velocity as you're getting out of a 1-ounce load in a 20 gauge. You're going to get about the same recoil, so don't worry about it. Now, shot type is what you have to be concerned about in South Dakota, at least. In some places, non-toxic pellets must be used. Now, most of us would say, well, I guess we have to shoot steel shot. Well, that's one good option. And it works very well on upland birds of all types because it's so hard and those pellets are so round, you don't get the deformation you sometimes get with soft lead pellets. So as a result, your patterns stay even. The shot is evenly distributed in that pattern. As that goes down range and opens up more and more and more, you don't get pellets flying off into no man's land. But the pellets are not as dense or heavy as lead, so they're not going to fly quite as far or retain as much energy down range. But at 30, 35 yards, steel pellets, yeah, that's plenty of power and punch. All you need, really. The trouble with longer distances in steel shot is that you have to go to a larger pellet diameter in order to get your mass or your weight up to where you're reaching out a little bit farther and maintaining that energy. And that's pretty much across the board. So figure, if you think 6-shot in lead is about right for pheasants at 30 yards and under, and I think it is, you'll probably want a 5 or a 4 or maybe even a 3-shot pellet in steel. Just go up a couple of numbers to get a wider diameter steel pellet. That means you're going to have fewer pellets in the shell, but it'll probably pattern a little better than the lead, so you're probably about even on that. I have just found that most of the steel loads I use for the uplands work beautifully. But if you want a little more weight, want a little more reach, you can go to some non-toxic alternatives. One of them, of course, is bismuth. Bismuth is not as dense as lead, but it is denser and heavier than steel. So you've kind of got to compromise there. A little more pricey, but not too bad. So you want to consider a bismuth shell, and there are lots of them out there. Bismuth as a product is a little bit, what should we say? It breaks, it shatters a little too easily. And it doesn't make perfectly round pellets all the time. But there are some companies working on it quite intensively. Boss is one of them that really shines for me. They've been doing some metallurgy and improving their bismuth and coating it with copper to keep it rounder and together so it doesn't shatter and break. And other companies are mixing some things with it, I believe, to make them stick together better and don't break up. So the bismuth pellets of today are a lot better than they were even 10 years ago. So you might want to check out your bismuth loads. And then your final one is some kind of a tungsten. Now, tungsten is an incredibly dense, heavy material, more dense than lead. So it's heavier than lead. And if you're a duck hunter or a turkey hunter, you've probably heard about it. That's where you get something like this TSS shell from Federal. That's got tungsten in it that's just super, super heavy and dense. And man, that will really reach out there and deliver a wallop on something. But oh my gosh, they'll also deliver a wallop on your wallet. They are pricey. I don't know. We're talking $3 a shot or something crazy. They might even be up to $5. It just all depends on what the going price is on tungsten. Most of the tungsten in the world comes out of mines in China, so they can pretty much hold us hostage if they want to. But I think you're going to do just fine with steel. But here's the thing you have to consider. When you hunt private land in South Dakota, you can use any shot you want. But if you get onto federal lands or state lands, like state game production areas, federal waterfowl management production areas, you have to use the non-toxic shot. Well, not a huge problem unless you get caught with the wrong shell in your pocket. If the game warden stops you and say, hey, how you guys doing? You getting your birds? Let me check your ammunition here. You're on a waterfowl production area, so you can't have any lead. And you open your gun and you got steel shot in there. And then you look in your pockets and you got a couple of rounds you had from before that are lead shot. You've got lead shot with you in the field. That's not allowed. You're probably going to get slapped. So my solution is to always, everywhere, even on private land, use steel or bismuth, some non-toxic. Now, if you think that's getting a little too pricey, you can switch and swap. But here's what'll happen oftentimes. I'll be carrying lead and I'll walk a farmer's field and I'll get to the fence line, and across the fence is a state area or a federal area. And it looks like it's seething with pheasants. And all I have to do is step over that wire and I walk that field and get my birds. But I've got lead shot on me. What am I going to do? Throw it all out and bury it or something? Or am I going to walk a half mile back to the truck and make a swap? I found it's just a lot easier to stick with my non-toxics all the time. Unless I absolutely, positively know I'm strictly going to be hunting on my friend's farm fields all the time. So those are the things you want to consider. Beyond that, someday soon, I think we are going to go into more details on the ballistics of shotguns and shot shells, because I think for a lot of shooters, especially new shooters, they're a little bit confusing. It's not like a rifle. Like a lot of people think a 12 gauge hits harder than a 20 gauge. And that's not necessarily true. If they're shooting the same size pellet of the same material, let's say a number 4 in lead, and they're both pushing that payload at 1,200 feet per second, those pellets are each carrying identical energy. So understanding ballistics and trajectories and such on shot shells is a little bit different, and we're going to get deep into that. We'll cut some open, get out the internals and show you the wads and how they make it different and the different pellets and all that fun stuff. But for now, just know that these are what you can use successfully for your South Dakota pheasant hunts. And then I think we've got a blog up on Ron Spomer Outdoors that details where to find these free public hunting areas and how to hunt them. That's a whole nother program. We did that last year. You might want to check that out because the season is still open as I speak. We're just before Christmas here, and I think South Dakota is now holding their pheasant season open deep into January, or maybe even all the way through January. I haven't looked at the regulations lately, but I've heard that. And of course, Kansas is open until the end of the month, or at least used to be. And I think Nebraska, and those are kind of the 3 big pheasant hunting states. So if you didn't get exactly what you wanted for Christmas and you want to give yourself a better present, treat yourself to a late season pheasant hunt. I don't think you'll go wrong. This is Ron Spomer. Hunt honest and shoot straight.